Oh, my niece got third.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Third place in her gymnastics meet.
Yep.
Nice.
And the two girls think that came in front of her from Woga, which is like the biggest gym in Dallas. So
That's pretty awesome. Like
yeah.
that's legit. Oh my God. What's her like events and stuff?
So they do uneven bars, which
Hmm.
so right now it's like in the level that she's at, everyone does the same routine and then they just get scored, you
So
know.
it's not like an SEC gymnastics meet where you have the four events like vault.
So they do all four events.
Okay.
They're just, rated at a lower level.
Oh, of course. I mean, like
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
expect like I don't know
Yeah.
what age your niece is, but like I don't think we've
She's
ever actually.
9.
She's
Yeah.
9. So yeah, I
Yeah.
wouldn't expect to grade a fourth grader on a college gymnastics level,
Yeah.
but yeah, or even have the same height of bars and things like that. Like I didn't move up to playing a 10-foot goal in basketball until I was in fourth grade. So like, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, hamper your, I guess, manage your expectations for what you're going to see. But that's awesome though. Like
Yeah.
that's legit.
Yeah. I'm ready for her to get up to like, I think it's level 6 when they can start kind of like doing their own routines.
Hmm.
Because right now they all do the same exact thing with the same exact music. So every like 2 minutes you hear the same song again and again. I'm like, I hear that in my nightmares now. Like we need to move on from that.
It's just over and over again the
Yeah.
same stuff. Oh my goodness. Yeah,
Yeah. I
that
bet those
would.
judges are so over it by
Oh,
the
they
end
got
of
to
the
be
day.
sick of it. Like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, no. They sold out Barnhill for gymnastics like this week, right? For the
Yeah.
LSU. Yeah, I thought that was
And
really
then
cool.
they got it was like the highest team score in Arkansas history.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, that's nuts. I'm glad that they
Yeah.
did so well. Like, I really got. I'm not gonna say I'm into gymnastics, but like, I've really come to enjoy watching it. Like, because Avery
Mhm.
like took me to the Auburn meet last year, the one where
Oh
Auburn
yeah.
was
See Suni Lee.
yeah, and it's saw Suni Lee, and like
Yeah.
it's never been that like I've never like thought of it as not a sport or anything like that because I've just never understood it. I never learned it or
Yeah.
anything about it because it wasn't a sport that I grew up playing or anything. But like actually seeing it was really fun. And then
Mhm.
like the other side of it was like, it is so physically demanding. Like that is
Oh
such a
yeah.
crazy sport. Like when you think about like what goes into gymnastics with balance and of the acrobatics and flexibility, like it's so cool. Like just
It's absolutely insane. Like that's one of the reasons I've always enjoyed like watching it on the like Olympics
mhm.
just because I'm like I've never in my life even imagined that I could do those things.
Oh
So,
yeah, never. I've actually tried rings before, like to pull myself up on rings, and I was like,
mhm.
I'm never going to get myself parallel. That's never going to happen. Like, and it's like, and I think I got some pretty good shoulder strength, but like, no, like it just was not going to happen for me. I don't
Yeah.
know if I'm just so heavy that I can't make that maneuver work, but like, yeah,
It's just
it's
rough all around.
everything, and they make it look so easy too. It looks effortless. It's kind of like baseball. It straight up lies to you about like because they're doing it so well about how easy it looks, but then you actually
Yeah.
go do it yourself and you're like, this is insanely complicated. Like this
Mhm.
is so hard to do. Like I said, pulling myself on those rings was dang near impossible. So like I get it. Like, yeah.
Maybe
So
the men's basketball team needs to go work out with the gymnastics team.
work on
Like,
some.
you know how they did I think it was it last summer, the summer before, like Musk took them to that boxing gym in Springdale.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
They
Yeah.
need to do that with gymnastics. That'd be so fun to watch.
That would be a ton of fun to watch some basketball players do some gymnastics.
Yeah.
Like, I would pay to watch the videos on social media between like, if Arkansas or Florida's gymnastics team like brought their basketball players in or their football players in to watch, let's cross sports right there. That'd be really cool. What would be even cooler is if somehow like you could schedule a game like during the non-conference for
Yeah.
like, Arkansas's got Barnhill, right? Is where they do most of their gymnastics meets, which was the old basketball stadium. So like what if there's a way to like get all the stuff cleared, like you sell one group of tickets and you have a gymnastics meet immediately followed by a basketball game.
That'd be super cool.
That would be amazing. That would
It
be
would
it would
take forever, but
Oh
it
yeah, it
would
would
be
take
super cool.
take so long to take all that you would need like some really good stage managers to pull that
Yeah.
off.
Gymnastics meet at 9 a.m., basketball game at 6 p.m. Might be able to get that
Might be able
one.
to pull that one off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just double up on it one day. It might be a good one for like the red and white game or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, something kind of unique. That'll be a ton of fun if you could ever do that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just like obsessed with the Razorback team since Jordan Weber's the coach. Like, that's super cool.
An Olympian, right? You got an Olympian leading the way. So,
Exactly.
well, I'll tell you what, you need some Olympic effort right now, apparently, to win the Big 12 SEC Challenge because, my gosh, did the SEC get their butt kicked in that one. Welcome to the Hoop Southbound podcast. My name is David.
Hey, guys, it's Maddie.
And we welcome you in to the show this week where we're talking a little bit about what happened in the SEC Big 12 Challenge. The answer is not good. And then also what, all the other, of course that happened. Of course that happened. Of course I would get a phone call right in the middle of trying to do this intro here. Yeah, we're talking about the Big 12 SEC Challenge and how it did not turn out good for the Razorbacks and everybody else.
In the SEC.
In the SEC. And then how it turned out pretty good for a couple of teams. We're talking about some other great stuff. We got an interview with Ben McKee talking about the Tennessee Auburn game for this week. We're also going to talk to the Up Tempo podcast guys about their thoughts on the Auburn Tigers and where they're at in this season. Get a little bit of preview for their week against Georgia and Tennessee. Going to be a fun podcast today. Maddie, let's start off with the Big 12 SEC Challenge. First initial thoughts on this and kind of what you were feeling on what took place.
If I'm going to be honest, I think we saw what everyone kind of expected. Like you tweeted yesterday, pretty much everybody picked Big 12 when it came to the majority of the matchups. You have your exceptions like Tennessee, Texas, the one upset, the Oklahoma and Auburn or Alabama. But, the matchups were matching. They pretty much called it like it was going to go. And unfortunately, it did not go in a positive direction for the SEC.
Yeah, I thought my impressions were Big 12's deep. Like they're very there is no bottom to that league. Like or no top. I don't know the best way to phrase that, but they're incredibly deep league. Oklahoma is a good basketball team, and they're one of the worst teams in the Big 12. West Virginia, not that super impressive of a team when it comes to Big 12 standards, but like with Oklahoma State, and West Virginia, I do think seeing those teams now again, I've seen them play before, but like watching those teams again against SEC teams, I would think those teams would finish somewhere in the top 8 of the SEC this year. Like the game against Ole Miss and Oklahoma State, for instance, we were talking about this a little bit before recording. Ole Miss isn't a good basketball team, and they were playing Oklahoma State. There was never going to be a doubt that Ole Miss was going to lose in Stillwater. That's just the impression that we had going into this. The SEC, to me, has about 6 teams that are the caliber of those teams that are in the Big 12 that you were playing. You have some teams who would probably be competitive in the Big 12, but still finish in the bottom outside of those 6. And then the rest of the conference is not as invested in the basketball like the rest of the conferences. And that's, for instance, like a team like Ole Miss just does not have the ability to compete because they're just not of that talent caliber that you see in the Big 12.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think an interesting spin, if we look at these games and just some of the matchups, there are only 2 away teams that won. So a big what if for me in this matchup is, if the games were swapped home and away, I think we see Arkansas beat Baylor. I think we see probably, I don't want to say Florida beat KSU, but, it's a possibility.
More competitive game, probably.
Yeah, and I think we definitely see Auburn beat West Virginia if it was at home.
I definitely agree with the assessment on that one. I would even add Alabama beating Oklahoma. I know Oklahoma blew out Alabama, but when you're starting slow, or you're on the road, it's a lot more difficult to find your gear than when you have your crowd behind you. And I think that's part of what we saw. Now, Oklahoma came out with a really great game plan. They emulated a lot of the things that Gonzaga was doing and tore apart Alabama in the paint and trying to make that middle screen work. They did a really good job of tearing apart Alabama. But I think if you play that game in Tuscaloosa, the fans aren't going to let a really good Alabama team lose. They may still lose, but they're not going to let them lose. Like that's going to be the situation. So I definitely don't think we see that same result in Tuscaloosa. I don't think we get the same result if you play that game, 10 more times. Like I
Yeah.
don't think that same result again.
I think
I
even maybe a neutral site game
No, yeah, for
would have
sure.
been a
If you
different story too for
Yeah,
that
if
game.
you play that game in Tulsa, or you even, you play that game in Tulsa or you play it somewhere in like Memphis or something like that,
Mhm.
Alabama, I think, beats Oklahoma. It's one of those things you can't overreact to wins and losses sometimes because sometimes they're just way worse than what they actually are. And I don't think that nothing has really changed my mind drastically about Alabama. Now we're going to talk about Alabama in a little bit, but I'll just put this like out there before we get to the assessment and talk about Alabama this week. I did say in the conference preview episode that I don't understand why Arkansas gets the storyline about being the young team when Alabama is also a young team, and why that storyline didn't pertain to them. And that was part of
Because
the
they're
conference.
winning.
Back then, when we were doing that episode, both teams were winning. Both
True.
teams were winning at that time when we had that conversation. So I always said Alabama's going to drop some games they probably shouldn't drop, somewhere in the middle. Like it's going to happen. Luckily for them, the first one that it seems that they just had a terrible performance was against Oklahoma. And the reason that's lucky is one, it's a road game. If that same event occurred in Tuscaloosa, it would be a worse loss because of the way that the quadrant system works in the net. Number two, it's outside of SEC play. They're still undefeated in SEC play and still number one in the SEC when it comes to the standings. So
Mhm.
it was lucky that was the game as far as that goes. Now the next question is, where is it going to happen next? Because I think Tennessee is going to be tough for them to win at, and you just never know. There's going to be an upset somewhere. Somewhere
Yeah.
there's going to be an upset. Go find a team that's going to be hot coming in, and Alabama plays a little bit sluggish. Maybe Brandon Miller doesn't have a good game. This is stuff that's on the table, especially when when Alabama plays a more experienced team. And when that happens, they're on potential for an upset at that point. Again, though, not a lot has changed my mind about how good Alabama is. They're still a really good team. But this is kind of what I was getting at. I didn't understand why the narrative was only in Arkansas's court and not on Alabama's at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, it's going to be interesting to see a little further down the line when you have these guys gain a little bit more experience. I think a lot of them aren't going to stay next year, but by the time March Madness comes around, we get to the NCAA tournament, I think we see a different caliber Alabama team than we saw against the OU team this weekend.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, we're going to see a different caliber team the rest of the way. There's just going to be games that I just think they're going to drop. That's just
Yeah.
going to happen. And I could be completely wrong. Nate Oates is a pretty good basketball coach, but logically, when you have guys that young, mistakes are going to happen.
Mhm.
Big stars don't show out in certain games. You think about Moses Moody for Arkansas in the NCAA tournament during his year in college. Brandon Miller's going to have a game where he just does not show up at all. It's going to happen, and it's going to do nothing to his NBA draft stock or anything like that.
Mhm.
It's just he's a freshman, and sometimes freshmen get beat by experienced defenders. It happens.
Yeah.
But let's move on and talk a little bit about a couple of these games. We kind of talked a little bit about the Baylor Arkansas situation. If that game was played in Bud Walton, how we'd feel differently about it. Let's talk about Baylor and Arkansas for a minute.
I think Arkansas did have the advantage of the fact that Waco is so close to the Dallas area where there are a lot of Arkansas alumni. So I feel like they had, a little bit more behind them than you would see at a traditional away game. So I think that helped a little bit. And, it's just one of those things you always say Bud Walton had 8 points. So it's one of those, like, I think, there were a few more fans in the house. Arkansas might have come away with it. I personally think Joseph Pinion should have been in a little bit longer. Wouldn't have taken that shot cold. We might have seen a different result. But, for the majority of this game, I feel like both teams played pretty well. Arkansas, had a rough start, I would say. I think if they started off a little bit hotter, I think we would have seen a different game as well.
Ricky Council came out and played like a road warrior. That's one of the things I want to say about this Razorback team. The second thing I want to say is, despite this loss, despite it, Arkansas is playing better basketball right now.
Yeah,
Over the last 3 games, they have looked like a better team. Now, the third thing I want to say, and before we actually start jumping into the analysis of all this, is that Arkansas has to adjust to the refs in the second half. I took a little bit of flack for saying that on social media yesterday. I still think there's a ton of issues with SEC reps and blah, 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 blah. We can go through that. I really don't want to. We did it last week. But Arkansas, regardless of who is officiating, you still have to adjust to the officials in a game. They go to the locker room too. They talk about how they feel about their performance in the first half. So they've got a young team who just has not learned that skill yet. And that's why Arkansas is one of the most fouled teams in the SEC, or they commit the most fouls in the SEC. They're in the top 3 right now. I haven't looked today where they landed after this weekend, but they were number 1 going into Saturday. It's a problem. It's a real problem. And when you look at the free throw attempt discrepancies, Arkansas has an issue of allowing other teams to get to the free throw line. All their big losses, it's a common trend. Mizzou, you think about Creighton and Maui. You think about, game escapes the top of my head right now, but time and time we've seen it. Vanderbilt, I think, got to the line more than Arkansas when they were in Nashville. And then we saw once again in Baylor, there was a massive gap. And I know fans initially was like, well, it should be called both ways. And like the difference is that they're not committing the same amount of fouls because they got a little bit more experience and know what's going on. And they're adjusting those calls, those first 3 calls that you see. Arkansas just has not learned how to do that yet. Now, are the refs perfect? Absolutely not. Refs are going to make mistakes. There were missed calls all through that Baylor game.
Yeah, Muss's technical comes to my mind.
That the technical where Muss was right was pretty ridiculous. You need to give him a little bit more leeway there. I wasn't happy with the refs in that one. I wasn't happy with the refs after Anthony Black got tackled. Wasn't happy about that one. But all in all, for the most part, I stand on this again. We saw a better called weekend than we've seen the entire time through SEC play this weekend. You know why? We had Big 12 referees out there calling games.
Yeah. I was about to say, because we had less than 40 fouls called in one game.
Yeah. We had Big 12 refs calling games, and it was much better. Collectively, I'm not talking specifically about the Razorback game. Collectively throughout this thing, that was some of the best officiating I've seen since conference play started. And I know this isn't a conference game, but we saw a much better called weekend. We saw more consistency in the foul calling. Even in the Arkansas game, we saw some consistency. Arkansas just could not adjust, and it kind of stood out like a sore thumb, and it finally made logical sense. This is the problem that Arkansas is having. This is why other teams are getting to the free throw line. This is the issue. Now, granted, in the SEC, they need to take a little bit of understanding of how the Big 12 manages this and not blow that whistle every 20 seconds. And then we'll see some better basketball in this conference. Arkansas just needs to understand where they are, and they'll be fine. That's just where it is. It's a skill that Muss is going to have to teach these guys in the locker or during practice. It's just, I think that's part of it right now.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, I think you look at, we say maybe 3-4 fouls that we didn't agree with. That's still 18-24 free throws. Like you said, better called game, just a lot more points Arkansas leaves on the table by committing those extra fouls.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, Ricky Council, huge game, 25 points. Debo Davis continues to be a very, very good basketball player for Arkansas. That experience level is showing off and how much work he's put in. 16 points again in this game. He's getting a consistent pattern on that. He grabbed 2 rebounds, had 4 assists. He was doing a great job. And then you mentioned Joseph Pinion at the top of this conversation. The other guy I talked about when we talked about the Arkansas issues a couple weeks ago, Jalen Graham, played great minutes from Jalen Graham, 9 rebounds, 4 points, the 25 minutes in that game. The problem with Jalen Graham right now is he's got to work on his free throws.
Yep. Totally agree with that one.
Totally right there. Gotta make those free throws. And I saw Mekhi Mitchell work on him. He's gotten better.
Yep.
Jalen Graham's got to step up now too, because that's a bread and butter thing for Arkansas. And that's a big thing that if you're going to the foul line less, you better hit a high percentage. Just saying, because you need.
I mean, if you're going to be a big man, if you're going to be down low for the majority of your minutes in a game, you're going to get fouled more likely than not. If you're not going to be able to get points underneath, finish on those that you get fouled on, make them at the line.
Absolutely. He is an asset for Arkansas. He's got to figure out how to hit those free throws so he can see more minutes on the court, and that'll help quite a bit for the Razorbacks. Let's move on and talk a little bit about Missouri. Huge game for Missouri at home, taking down Iowa State. That was, I'm not going to call that a shocker or anything like that. I know there were some people kind of talking about, yeah, I feel like this is the game. This is kind of the game that there's going to be an upset here in the top 25. And we've seen Mizzou play pretty good ball throughout the season against bigger named opponents. They took down a massive Iowa State team, beat them by 17 points. That's pretty awesome. Kobe Brown had a huge game for the Tigers.
Yeah, I think we talked about it a little bit in our interview last week. Kind of looking into the Big 12 SEC Challenge and just the way Mizzou's been playing, they're looking like a team that, we might see in the tournament. And from here on out, I mean, they have a little bit of, some difficult games left in their conference season, but I feel like it's something they can contend with for sure.
When you win games like this, you start getting away from the bubble conversation more and more every time you do it. And they've got wins. They got Q1 wins against Arkansas, Illinois, Iowa State, Kentucky. Well, actually, I don't think Kentucky. I think Kentucky was a Q2 win, but they've got good wins in their pocket, and they're doing really, really well. Just that I'm impressed with the ability that Missouri has. Let's take a quick look at where they are in the net. As far as Q1 wins, they got 3 of them. They are undefeated in the quad 2, quad 3, and quad 4 metrics. The biggest thing, though, that's holding them back is the quad 4 metric, because that's where the majority of their games have been, are either in quad 1 or quad 4. 7 of their games have been in the quad 4 area. They're undefeated in that, so they're doing well where they need to be. So I'm impressed with Missouri. That was a fantastic win against Iowa State. Kobe Brown played outstanding. Demoy Hodge also, I think he had 17 points, 16, 17 points, really good minutes from one of the best players that they have. They got the contributions that they needed to get. And then again, how many times have we said that Mizzou's bench can do damage? There's 17 points coming off the bench for you at any given night for Mizzou.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really good team. Like what they did. I'm just impressed. I'm really impressed at the job that Dennis Gates is doing in Missouri. Now, granted, he may have inherited the best job for a first-year coach, or what has turned out to be the best job for first-year coaches in the SEC, but what he's done with it is still remarkable, and he's done a really great job.
Yeah, I think right now we're looking at first-year coaches. It's got to go to either Dennis Gates or Mike White down in Georgia.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Mike White's doing a really good job too. But right now, I would give it to Dennis Gates. He's got a tournament team and a team that's starting to get away from the bubble in his first year. Got some experienced players, but we'll kind of dive into that later on in the season. Like awesome work by him. Let's talk about Kentucky really fast and their game that they had against Kansas. There was a moment at this game at the beginning when I really thought Kentucky was going to beat Kansas. They looked really, really good.
I really did too. I thought, there were some glimpses in that game where we saw Oscar Tshiebwe really start to, take action, and then Jacob Toppin as well. Glimpses. I say Jacob Toppin, not the whole game, glimpses. But, I think if we had a more consistent game from both of them, we might have seen a different outcome. But the way that Kansas team was playing, I feel like they would have adjusted to it and still probably would have came away with the win.
Bill Self has not lost 4 games in a row at Kansas. That hasn't happened yet. Kansas hasn't lost 4 games in a row, and I believe either of our lifetimes. It's not. That's just something that does not happen. It does.
Did you hear the announcer say that?
Yeah, I think I heard it actually on College Game Day that morning. But yeah, it's been a minute. It's been a minute.
I feel like they said it like at least 5-6 times in like the 15 minutes that I watched at the end of that game.
They just kept saying it over and over again. I might have just been focused on the play and looking at numbers and things like that. Yeah, it's a fact though. Like, and it's super impressive.
It was like every time Kansas had like a good play. Well, they haven't lost 4 games in a row. I was like, okay, we've heard it.
Yeah.
Let's keep on watching the game.
I think the missing ingredient for Kentucky in this game was CJ Frederick. He didn't have quite the big games that we've come accustomed to seeing him. He didn't even hit a 3-pointer. He went 0 for 5 behind the arc. And that's not something that's super common. But I think when you look at the rest of the stats in this game, yes, Kentucky went 15% from 3, which is not desirable. But when you look at the free throw line, now, yes, Kentucky was +7 in free throw makes, but they were also shooting at 69.6, and they were +13 in free throw attempts. You got to hit your foul shots. You got to hit your foul shots because Kansas is over there hitting 90%. You've got to make that count because this game's close enough to where you get that to 20. That's 4 more points, and you're talking about a different scenario going down the stretch. Like it's just nuts. And just time and time again, we talk about turnovers and we talk about free throws, how they tally up at the end of every game. Yeah, you get a couple more points from CJ Frederick. You hit a couple more free throws. You're doing great. You cannot, with a team that's the caliber of Kansas, let them go to the line and shoot 90% while you're shooting under 70. It's just facts.
Yeah, and now that we're talking about it, I think we look at the SEC as a whole, and if we improve foul shooting and points off of turnovers, we see a different UK-Kansas game. We see a different Baylor-Arkansas game. We see a different Auburn-West Virginia game. Yeah,
no joke. In every game, I believe, the 3 that jump up in my mind, I believe the SEC lost. So Kentucky lost to Kansas in the turnover battle. I know Arkansas lost to Baylor in the turnover battle. I know that I believe Auburn also lost the turnover battle in their game against West Virginia. Mistakes, and they cost you every time.
Yep.
It's a problem. It just is. They will take games away from you all day long. One of the stats that the commentators were talking about constantly, we highlighted on Stat Friday. Kentucky is a better rebounding team than the performance that they had against Kansas. They're a better rebounding team than Kansas. They had 4 offensive rebounds. Kansas won the offensive glass +4. Got to get your putbacks. You got to get those opportunities. It's just nuts. That's lower expectations that we're accustomed to seeing for Kentucky.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's just the Kentucky team that everyone's not used to. Hopefully they can turn it around and get something going for them the rest of the season. Much
like Arkansas, they're in a situation where time's ticking for them to improve their place in the NCAA tournament. They're currently last 4. They're a last 4 team in the tournament. They need to keep winning ball games if they want to stay there or get higher. They have to. That's just exactly where they are. They've got to start winning some bigger games. All right, so that's a wrap on the Kentucky-Kansas game. 3 things I want to talk about real fast. Number 1, Tennessee. Tennessee just beat the tar out of Texas. The score is closer than what the game actually was. Tennessee, to me, in my opinion, turned the Longhorns straight up into a ribeye steak. Opinions on that?
with potatoes, butter, loaded.
Yeah.
I think after the Kentucky game, we saw a completely different, more well-rounded Tennessee team. I know Coach Barnes kind of switched up the lineup, and I think that's been doing wonders for the way they play the game.
Absolutely. Zakai Ziegler is making an awesome 6-man, in my opinion, for the Vols. They're doing great. He's doing a really good job just giving contributions at all given times he's put out in the court. I'm really impressed with Tennessee. They're doing great. They played the same way they did in the first half as they did in the second half until they started slowing the game down a little bit. Really, really good performance. Now, as far as Tennessee's resume, I think, number 1, they are a number 1 seed. Just straight up, they are a number 1 seed. Look at their resume. They're 4-1 in their quadrant 1 games. Second, they have also beaten Texas and Kansas, which are top 10 wins in the AP poll, in KenPom, and in the net. Those are also 2 of the best teams in the Big 12, which right now I think is inarguably the best conference in college basketball. So you just beat 2 of the best teams in that conference. Right now, I would think Tennessee would finish 2nd or 3rd, maybe 1st, depending, in the Big 12. They're a good basketball team. I'm not willing to say they're the number 1 team in the country. They got some bad losses, like to Colorado, which has turned out not to be horrible. But, our first impression of it was not good. They've had times where they've shown weakness. But overall, Tennessee is a very good basketball team and definitely one of the top 4 teams in the country. And I think they're a Final Four caliber team. They're very good. And I think their resume backs them up being one of the best in the country right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm on the Zakai Ziegler fan train right now.
Yeah, great game from Zakai Ziegler. You know what? Every time I write his name when we do a tweet, it tries to autocorrect the E and the I.
Mine does too. I was writing my notes for this week. I was like, no, that's not how you spell it. You're trying to make me look dumb.
Yeah, so anybody who follows us on Twitter, if you ever see the I before the E, know that's autocorrect on Twitter, and we just didn't catch it to fix it in time. So
It's like all the times that people probably think I'm bashing Vandy by putting candy. No, it's just autocorrect.
It's just autocorrect. What up, autocorrect? All right. So the second thing I wanted to talk about real quick was we need to give props to Mississippi State. Huge win over TCU. Probably their best win of the year. Undoubtedly, just an amazing job from the Bulldogs beating the number 11 team in the country. You want to talk about Tulu Smith, 27 points. Stevenson, 10 points. Davis, 16 points. 11 points or more. 10 points from Matthews. You got points everywhere. You got minutes, contributions from everyone. You beat TCU by +9 in rebounding. You beat them +10 in assists. And you also only gave up 4 more turnovers than they did. Great game. They actually shot worse at the free throw line than TCU. And then they were hitting 50% of their field goals. They did a great job at home in overtime to beat the Horned Frogs. It was an impressive win for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, and I think, as much as we're praising their offense, their defense was fantastic as well.
Defense has always been fantastic for Mississippi State.
Yeah.
That has been their strength the entire time throughout the season.
Mm-hmm.
Let's jump real quick into what we're looking at with Mississippi State as far as their resume goes. Right now, no one seems to be talking about if Mississippi State is a tournament team. I think that's going to start changing as Mississippi State keeps going on, if they can use the momentum from this win to get a couple more wins. Because the area that's of concern on their resume is the fact that they have no Quadrant 2 wins. They don't have any bad losses. They have no Quadrant 3 losses, no Quadrant 4 losses. They have 3 Quad 1 wins, but they have no Quadrant 2 wins. If they can start picking up Quadrant 2 wins, they're in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and I think with the rest of the season, I think Mississippi State has a chance to pick up a few Quadrant 2 wins, maybe a Quadrant 1 win if we see an upset. So I think the further we get into this season, the more we're going to hear Mississippi State's name in the conversation.
Yeah, I believe right now on the road, outside of South Carolina, Ole Miss, and LSU, I believe in the net, anyone you go play on the road right now is a Quadrant 2 win opportunity. So Mississippi State winning a game or two on the road could go a long way to their hopes of making the NCAA tournament. So we'll see where they can go. It's getting close, and they've got a chance to do some big things under their first year with Chris Jans. All right, before we get to our biggest games of the week, we do have an interview for you guys from the guys of the Up Tempo podcast, talking to us a little bit about what has been one of the harder Auburn teams to figure out. Are they a top 25 team? Are they an 8th seed, or do they have the potential to go up and get the 6th seed? And what kind of week can we expect after going 0-2 over this last week? We welcome them into the show and check out the interview, guys. All right, and we welcome into the show Blake Lane from the Up Tempo podcast. How you doing today, Blake?
Man, I'm doing good. I appreciate you for having me on. I'm ready to talk some Auburn basketball.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, it's been a tough week for Auburn. Let's start there. You got the losses to A&M and West Virginia this week. What do you think went wrong in these games for the Tigers?
Man, just guard play, man. It all comes back to guard play, and there's 2 guys that I kind of want to call out, and that's Zep Jasper and KD Johnson. KD Johnson, I don't really know what's been going on this year, but it hasn't been right. His offense just isn't there. We've seen a little bit of it yesterday, but just the entire season, he's just been off. I know there's been some locker room controversy. He got in trouble earlier in the year. Bruce just kind of kept that in-house. But Zep, man, I know he's a great on-ball defender, And it's just the lack of size at the guard position. You can tell. Look at Texas A&M. The other night, the traps that they were going after. All right, and Auburn just can't beat that because they're undersized and the lack of shooting on the perimeter. I mean, it's just. I think Bruce not going to the portal and getting an elite shooter at the 2 spot is really the downfall to this team. And obviously Chance Westry, we know he had the off-season knee surgery, and everybody thought he was going to bounce back, and things didn't go as planned. Not having him and Yohan Traore just not getting on page, and it's just not the same team that we saw in Israel. And so I don't know. I was talking to my brother a while ago, and I said, we have to recruit guys at the guard position with size because we're getting killed, man. And really, if you want to go back and look at the second half of the Mississippi State game, I think that's where the recipe actually started, is because Mississippi State started the trap. And I think other people watched that film and they said, hey, this right here, it kills Auburn. And it's tough, man, because now the expectations at Auburn are so high because you go to the Final Four and then you get to number 1 last year and you're sending players like Okoro and Jabari and Walker to the pros. And then you come this year and you lose 5 games and people are saying, hey, what's going on?
Yeah, to quote someone, a legend in the SEC, Nolan Richardson at Arkansas used to always talk about, you got to constantly feed the monster. And yeah, you're right. The expectations have risen significantly at Auburn under the tenure at Pearl. You talk about the great years that being the number 1 team in the country last year with Jabari Smith and making the Final Four in 2019. Expectations have risen, and yeah, it's kind of been bumpy, even though despite having a very good team this year across, from a national perspective.
Yep.
Yeah. So despite being, in the top 25, like I just mentioned, bracketologists have Auburn around the 8 and 9 line as far as their seed for the tournament. What do you think Auburn is missing for that move up? Now, I know you just mentioned the shooters, but, what do you think win-wise, games that you might have left behind, or some of the other X factors that might be contributing right now to that seeding?
I can tell you what they're missing. They're missing Jalen Williams taking over ball games. That's exactly what they're missing. Some nights you will see Jalen Williams take 5 shots, and that is absolutely uncalled for. There is no way that this man should be getting 5 shots. Yesterday, 11. I still think that is just not enough. It's not enough. And Alan Flanagan, I don't know what happened. I just, his inconsistency, and it's just a struggle, man, because it can't be Wendell and Jonai every night out. These guys, you got to get consistency, man. And I tell you what, after they went to Athens and they lost to Georgia, I put on Twitter, NIT team. And I got a lot of blowback, and people were like, NIT team, you're crazy. And I said, let me tell you something. When they start getting into the meat of this SEC schedule, when you start having to go on the road to Tennessee, which is coming up, when you have to go to Alabama, all right, when you have to go to Rupp Arena in Kentucky, you still don't have a quad 1 win. And have fun at those venues because it's not going to be easy. And you still got to go to A&M. I mean, and they just, they could have beat Auburn by 30. And so I don't know what Bruce does, man. You gotta have Jalen Williams take over more. I honestly believe that.
Let's talk about Jalen Williams a little bit more. This is a question that Maddie wanted me to ask today. He has played well at times this season. He's given some valuable minutes to the Tigers, but what do you need to see from him this week going to, in that revenge game against Georgia that's coming to Neville, and then going in the TBA to play Tennessee? What do you need from him to make a contribution to this team?
I need 15 shots. I need confidence. Okay. And you can see it like yesterday. Okay. There's shots there for Jalen, And sometimes he just shies away from the moment. A&M, I know there was a point in the second half this past week, man, against A&M. He caught a ball on the wing at the 3, and he dished it to Zepp in the corner. And I said, why? Why would you dish it to Zepp, who he's not a great three-point shooter. He's not a great scorer. Take the shot. Be confident. Shoot the basketball. If you miss, guess what? Keep shooting. That's what shooters do. And we know he can get in the paint, and that floater is phenomenal. I think Auburn needs to go to that a little bit more. I think they shy away from it from time to time a little too much. And just ooze with confidence, man. And it gets at me. It gets at me because it's frustrating. And the off-ball movement, and look, I see a lot of this from Auburn, man. You see they will get in like 4 or 5 minute stretches where it is just Wendell Green Jr. dribbling the basketball at the top of the key. I mean, he will just sit there and he will dribble 20 seconds off the shot clock. And I'm just like, there's no movement. There's not. And then guess what? It's a logo 3. And I know Bruce is all about freedom and he wants to get out and transition and run and gun, but you just don't have that this year. And so I just need to see somebody step up.
That makes complete sense. I've often said to Maddie a couple times on the show throughout the season, it's like we see one Auburn team on the road and then we see one at home. And I know at times at home it's been frustrating, like we saw at the A&M game, but most of the time they play decent at home. And like it's a two-faced team, it seems like. And you get in those situations where you're just relying on Broom and Green on a regular basis, and then when you get home, the role players seem to step up significantly more at times. So yeah, I can understand that certain level of frustration. Let's talk about that revenge game with Georgia, though. Auburn struggled in Athens in game 1, like you just mentioned. Road game's been a mess. What are the adjustments that you need to see from the Tigers, and what Pearl needs to do to get a W in this game?
You got to figure out a way to stop Oquendo. Their guards absolutely torched Auburn. And once again, it all comes back to, look, man, Wendell Green Jr., he just defensively, it's not there. I try to tell people all the time, man, you got a 6'3" guard like Oquendo, 6'4" guard. Wendell can't stay in front of that guy. It's tough. It is so tough. And KD struggles, and it's just Zepp. He does a great job, but he's not there offensively. And so Georgia torched you in the first game. You turned the ball over numerous amount of times. You better not turn the ball over this coming up week because Oquendo is a force. He will torch you again. And in my opinion, Georgia's oozing with confidence. I don't think they're scared of coming into Neville Arena. They picked up a big time dub yesterday, and also another thing that just popped in my head, you better start making your free throws. All right.
I mean, that's every game. You should listen to Maddie on this show sometime when she just sits there and goes, for the love of God, hit your free throws. We get free throws with basketball games.
And, everybody's sitting here and they're saying about yesterday, they're saying, well, we had the chance right there. Well, yeah, we did have a chance. And Jalen Williams, who I said needs to step up, you got to be a leader, man. When you get that AM1 right there with a chance to tie the ball game right there in the last 2-3 minutes, you got to sink that free throw. You got to hit that 3-point play. And if you come into Neville Arena this coming up week against Georgia and you don't hit your free throws, you turn the basketball over, you're asking for a disaster. And I'm being honest when I say this. I hate to say it, but if you lose to Georgia, expect yourself to be on the bubble because the schedule only thickens and it gets deeper. And I know Auburn fans hate to hear this, but man, there is a serious shot right now that if you don't start winning quad 1 games, you're going to find yourself out of the tournament.
There's a couple of teams sitting right there in that boat right now. Like we've talked about the middle of the SEC being very confusing about where they're actually going to be at because there's teams that are lacking quad 1 and quad 2 wins all over the place. You talk about Arkansas, you talk about Auburn, you talk about Mississippi State. It's definitely a resume issue that a lot of these middle teams seem to have, is not winning some of these very, very important games that they've had throughout the season. Let's talk about the Tennessee game. Now we're going to have Ben McKee on the show to talk a little bit more about the Tennessee perspective after a while in this show. But what are you thinking? You've got a team in Tennessee, best defensive rating, historic level of defensive rating. Top 5, I believe they're currently second, but I'd have to look at the stats to double check it on offensive rating. In every game, they start to look more and more consistent. They put up 40 and 40 and, not exactly, but 40, 42, 41, whatever against Texas, which is one of the best teams in the country. How do you plan a strategy for a team that plays that level of team style basketball and then has a few stars who can pop out at any given moments in Phillips, Vescovi, and Zakai Ziegler? How does Pearl game plan for that?
Have fun.
Sorry, that was a good response.
Honestly, Auburn, you better shoot the 3 ball well next Saturday. Because if you don't, you might get ran out of the building. Because we saw what this Tennessee team can do. We saw it all year. We saw it last night. And Auburn, you can't turn the ball over. Wendell Green Jr. is going to have to give you, in my opinion, he's going to have to give you 18 to 20. And you're going to have Jalen Williams in there. Jonah Broom, have fun, big fella. You got a tall task for you. And honestly, with that task on the defensive end that Jonah is going to have, I don't know if he's going to be able to do much offensively. I think this is a bad matchup for Auburn. If they win, man, it would be one of the bigger upsets in the year, in my opinion, in college, just because I think it's a terrible matchup for Auburn. They're not a great scoring team. And their defense, man, Auburn has given up 3 straight 30-point performances. And so, they gave up the Radford 30. They gave up Gigi Jackson 30. And then yesterday, Stevenson, I mean, put a hand in his face. I mean, come on now. That was ridiculous. But Auburn's just, look, one thing I do want to say is I need to see more Lior Berman. Okay. Lior only gets about 8 to 9 minutes a night, but somehow every single night he's on the floor, he hits 1 or 2 threes a game. And what is your main problem right now at Auburn on the offensive end? You don't have anybody that can hit a 3, and you got people sitting on the bench. And I just don't understand it. I know he might not be the best defensively, but right now he's about all you got at the 3-point stripe. So I don't know, man. I think Auburn's heading into disaster Saturday. I don't see any way they can win this game.
Well, let's end this on a positive note, because I do try to ask at least one fun question of all my guests. I kind of surprised them with that. So if you can make a time machine, now I know there's a couple of obvious ones, but to pick out one player who can help you out in that Tennessee game this weekend, who's it going to be? Is it going to be Charles Barkley? Are you going to go grab Jabari Smith? Like prime example, who you bringing
in? Give me Isaac Okoro.
Okay. Why's that?
Give me Isaac Okoro. Because I think he was one of the best defenders that you've ever had, and he was a guy that could take over. I think he could slow Tennessee down a little bit on the defensive end, and I also think he could help the offense at Auburn. He could step in there in that Flan position, and Flan, man, he just struggles, in my opinion. I don't know if it's a confidence thing. It's shot selection with him. I'm not sure, man, but Okoro could play the 2, he could play the 3, he could do it all, man. And he was going to get you 20. And I just think that's the guy I would bring in here for this Tennessee game. I really liked Isaac Okoro. I thought that Auburn team before COVID happened, I thought they were a Sweet 16, Elite 8 team. And I really loved Okoro, man. I thought he was a great piece for Bruce Pearl.
Yeah, definitely makes sense to me. All right. Can you let everybody know where they can find you at on social media, your podcast, and all that good stuff? Go ahead and let the people know.
Yeah, man. You can find me on Twitter at the Uptempo Pod, mainly just talking about Auburn sports. And you can find me over at Apple, iTunes, whatever is iTunes, Apple Podcast, or whatever it's called. And you can find me there at the Uptempo Podcast, the YouTube channel at the Uptempo Pod, Spotify as well. We're just kicking out Auburn content. I'm about to hop on here with one of my co-hosts, Dustin, and we're about to do an Auburn recap of the game yesterday up in Morgantown. So, yeah, man, I appreciate you for letting me hop on, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show today. I really do.
Yeah, man.
It always makes the show better to have somebody, instead of just me and Maddie talking back and forth, had some extra opinions in here. So it's always fun. We hope to have you again sometime soon. Hopefully there'll be a really good game. Hopefully maybe the Alabama Auburn game. Maybe we can get you and Christian together and you guys can argue about that game all you want. All right. Yeah. Have a good one. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much. Yeah, really good conversation there. It's been curious, right? Like, how do you assess Auburn at this point? And next week we're gonna have an interview with Bracket Dom to talk about bracketology in the SEC. So we'll get a little bit more data on Auburn, where we're thinking, because like I said, the road struggles have been something of a concern for Auburn, but they're a good basketball team. You can't leave them out of the NCAA tournament. How do you seed them is just nuts. It's going to be a wild ride for Auburn. So I'm interested to see what happens next.
Yeah, I think the games this week will definitely tell us a lot. So it'll be interesting to see where they're at.
Yep. Can they get revenge against Georgia, and can they beat Tennessee? Which, when we're actually moving on right now to talk about our biggest games of the week, or the drafts of this week. We're going to have an interview to talk about that Tennessee and Auburn game here in just a minute with Ben McKee. Let's go on and move to the drafts of the week.
And this week's drafts of the week are brought to you by BetUS. We will put a link down in our YouTube bio for the promo code that they are currently running. Make sure to check your local gambling laws to make sure they're in tune.
Yeah, got to make sure you're in compliance with those local gambling laws. I know, like, our state's a little weird with Arkansas, but yeah, you just got to make sure. You got to make sure you're placing those bets legally. You can win some big money, but then get in big trouble if you don't check things out. So it's important. It's important to do. And yeah, there's a little link down there. Just click on it if you're checking this out on YouTube today. Let's talk about our first biggest game of the week, game being played on Tuesday. Another game that looks like it's going to be in some wonderful winter weather up here in Northwest Arkansas. And that is, of course, the game between Texas A&M visiting the Arkansas Razorbacks. Maddie, in all honesty, this is an important game for both teams.
Definitely.
Very important game for both teams in their NCAA tournament hopes. Now, that said, Texas A&M playing some extremely good basketball. They are right now 15-6, 7-1 in conference play. They look like a different team than what they looked like in conference play, but they're still sitting right on that bubble line, according to Joe Lunardi and several bracketologists out there. They need to keep winning, and they got to get good wins like this. This is a Q1 opportunity that they'll have against the Razorbacks in Bud Walton Arena. Arkansas, this is a good quad 2 opportunity, a win that can help their chances of moving up on the seed line or solidify them a little bit more. It's going to be a very important game for both teams. Number one, just let's talk a little bit about where Texas A&M is. Texas A&M, while they have such a great record in conference play, it should be noted that they've played some weaker teams.
Yeah, I agree with that. I always get shocked when I'm looking at the standings and I see Texas A&M right under Alabama and Tennessee. But then I have to, kind of pedal back a little bit and remind myself that they haven't played as strong of a schedule as a lot of the other teams in the SEC. And, while I think they have some great talent, if they were to go head-to-head with Alabama, Tennessee right now, I think they'd be in a different spot.
I agree with you. That's where I'm at with the Aggies. Now, they're playing better basketball, and that should be noted. And they just did pick up a really good win on the road, beating Auburn in Neville, which was honestly, it ended the country's longest home winning streak. That was an impressive win. So they've shown they can go into hostile territory and win basketball games against good teams. Now they're going to have to figure out if they can do it again in what's one of the toughest environments in the SEC. Lucky for them, it looks like some more winter weather's on the way, so it might not be the crowd that a lot of people are anticipating would normally be at a game of this magnitude at Bud Walton.
Yeah, as an Arkansas fan, I'm kind of hoping they'll do what they did last week during the winter weathers, where they just kind of open it up to all students and they can get in. Hopefully those students are within walking distance and they can pack Bud Walton, because I think Arkansas really has a great opportunity here to get back in the win column. if they play the game like they played against Baylor or like they've played in their past couple conference games.
The last 3 games have been very good for Arkansas despite the loss to Baylor. They played good basketball against Mizzou. They just couldn't finish that game, lost that one by 3. Arkansas is winning at home, and the last 2 home games they've won by double digits. Now, granted, those games are against Ole Miss and LSU, but they've won those last 2 home games by double digits, and then their last 2 road games by a combined 6 points. They're playing good basketball on the road right now, unfortunately just not getting the W's, and then they're winning at home is what the last 4 games kind of tell us about the Razorbacks. Like I said, they do look like they're beginning to turn a corner. It's a matter of getting the wins now. So that's going to be an area of focus. When you look at this on paper, what I find really interesting, points per game, Texas A&M 74.6, for Arkansas 74.5. You look at points allowed, 66 points on average for Texas A&M, 65.1 for Arkansas. For the rebounds, 36.8 for Texas A&M, 36.2 for Arkansas. Assists, they're dead even at 13.3. Steals, anywhere between, Arkansas averages 1.5 more steals than Texas A&M a game. It's kind of weird. Like, they kind of look like mirror teams. So you're just going to find out who's more talented, I think, in this moment. When I look at these 2 teams, you got Anthony Black and you've got Ricky Council that I think are just huge for Arkansas. And then Mekhi Mitchell and Jalen Graham are both 2 really big men that can take over a basket or do really great stuff down low for the Razorbacks. Yep. Then you got the home court advantage for Bud Walton. I do like the Razorbacks in this game.
And you can't count out Devo Davis.
You cannot count out Devo Davis. No.
He has been amazing our last few games. I think he's really taken that role as a leader on this team to another level, as we've gotten further into conference play. So I think he is going to be a huge asset to Arkansas in this matchup.
100%. One of the names that like you need to know for this game, probably Radford Boots, as they like to call him down there. I don't know what's up with that nickname. I don't think I've ever heard of a player with the nickname Boots. You've also got Taylor for Texas A&M, very talented. He's going to be someone to look out for. There's good players on this Texas A&M team. Dennis is another good one, and Coleman. Like, they've got guys. You need to understand that. When you look at their top rebounders, Coleman 5.8, Mitchell 5.8. Ricky Council, 17 points per game. Wade Taylor, 14.8. Anthony Black, almost 4 assists a game. Taylor with 4, right, dead even. So, I mean, you got players that can match each other, but like I said, Texas A&M hasn't played the upper echelon of talent yet outside of Kentucky and Auburn. They lost that first really good test in Kentucky on the road, and then they passed the second one at Auburn. Now you're coming into Bud Walton Arena for round 3 of this to see where you actually are. And this is also a test to figure out where Arkansas actually is. So I'm interested in this game. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have Muss's keys to the game here. He's going to have to shut down Wade Taylor. He's been a superstar for them. And then, once you take him out of the element, they're going to have to keep tight defense on Coleman, and Marble's really stepped up the last few games too. So, I think we watched those 3 and it shuts down the rest of their offense.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that I think also Eric Musselman talked about, this team's more banged up than what we think it is. They're having to play a lot of minutes. So we're going to have to, I think we'll probably see a surprise player step up for the Razorbacks. Someone like a Joseph Pinion, someone's like a Mekhi Mitchell and not a Mekhi Mitchell, who has to step up. Of course, he said Mikkel's kind of beat up too. So we're going to have to see who's going to be the guy to do that little extra step up moment, kind of challenging the locker room to find out who that guy is going to be and be a leader on this team. Maybe we see some more Darian Ford in this game. So definitely interested to see.
Barry Dunning.
Let's see if Barry Dunning's get some minutes in this one. We'll see where it goes. Who's going to be the guy for Arkansas to step up in this game? If they don't find a guy to step up, they're going to have to be careful in this one because this is a very, very dangerous Texas A&M team. Let's move on to Wednesday and the rematch that I think Auburn fans are ready to play. Georgia versus Auburn. Maddie, I'm going to ask your first initial thoughts on this game.
I mean, Auburn's on the revenge tour with this one. I think, a lot of the Auburn fans and Auburn players were in shock the fact that Georgia came out with a win in that game. So I think this is going to be a must-win game for both the players and the fans. I think, with the home atmosphere and needing a W after that loss to WVU here will push them out front in this game.
I definitely think it's going to be interesting. Now, This is going to be the stat. We keep talking about Georgia off and on. We've been impressed about what they've done. They've won 14 games this season. They're above 500, unlike last year's team. Look at just where they're sitting at when it comes to conference play. They've beaten South Carolina and they've got Auburn on their resume. Like it's kind of weird, right? They're 4-4 in conference play, and two of those wins have come where? South Carolina, Ole Miss, and Auburn. Those are three of the four right there. It's weird. We just haven't seen Auburn or Georgia play significantly well against some of the better talented teams, and now they're going to have to come into Neville to play this game. I really like Auburn just to beat the pants off of Georgia in a revenge game here. I don't know if you're feeling the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. As much as I want to root for the underdog, I don't think we can ignore the fact that Auburn is going to be hungry for a win in this game.
Auburn's lost their last two. They're coming in to play this Georgia game. I definitely think that Auburn takes the W here. We won't stay too long on this one since we've had the interview. One of the things that I think is going to be interesting, though, is that matchup down low. Georgia does average more rebounds per game than Auburn, but Johnny Broome has the ability to take over the glass in any game. He averages 8.5 rebounds a game, almost 3 offensive rebounds a game. Really good player. I think we're going to have to see some really good minutes from Wendell Green in this. If Georgia wants a hope, Scary Terry Roberts is the guy you need to be looking at and hope that he could lead Georgia on the road. We'll see how that goes. It's going to be interesting, but to me, it's just, this is Auburn all day.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right. Well, we've got an interview, one that we've definitely been looking forward to, with Ben McKee to talk about our first Saturday matchup. And that game is between the Auburn Tigers, staying on the topic of Auburn, and the Tennessee Volunteers. And we welcome into the show Ben McKee from Go Vols 247. How you doing today, Ben?
I'm doing well, David. How are you?
I'm doing awesome, man. I know you're riding high right now after that Texas game. It's got to feel good to beat another major Big 12 team. Like right now, I think if the Vols were in the Big 12, they'd be up there right down the top right now.
Yeah, they would, and I kind of look at it as a future SEC team because here in definitely 2 years, maybe another year, depending on if Texas and Oklahoma can get out of their Big 12 contracts. I mean, that's a conference game. So Saturday night inside of Thompson Bowling Arena was really, really cool. It was an awesome matchup. It felt like one of those big time football neutral site games, and basketball's obviously has home and homes as well. It's just not a football thing. But it felt like one of those highly anticipated matchups that you've been looking for quite some time. But it's cool that we're going to get that every year now, or probably every year, because Texas may not come to Knoxville every single season, but the two teams are going to play. You're going to get to go to Austin. That game last year when Rick Barnes made his return home was really, really cool. So the fact that Tennessee is going to be able to play Texas and even Oklahoma moving forward. We saw what Oklahoma did on Saturday by beating Alabama. Adding more elite brands to the conference is good for the conference, and it's good for the potential matchup that we'll have down the road. So that was my thought, is that we'll be able to get more of that here soon.
It's definitely a high profile win when you get wins over Kansas and Texas. And you're right, bringing Texas into this conference is going to be awesome. You've got some good branding there that's going to come from those two programs, both on football and actually all three for all programs. You're talking about baseball, basketball, and football across the board. Really, really good brands to bring into the conference. Let's talk about the Vols a little bit. Wins over two major Big 12 teams, top 10 ranking, 4-1 in Q1 games. I can go on. The resume is actually really impressive, which is why we have Tennessee ranked number 1 in our power rankings this week. What has led to the success that the Vols are seeing this year?
The defense, and it's not even close. It's the defense, and the offense is not a bad offense, and their statistical numbers and the analytics don't necessarily do the offense justice. Going into last night's game against Texas, Tennessee was ranked 40th in adjusted offense, and they're much better than what that ranking says. They've dealt with some injuries this year. Josiah Jordan-James missed several games the first 2 months of the season because he had a quirky knee injury. They've had illness go around the locker room there for 2 to 3 weeks, and it was a different guy out every game. They even had a game where both Tyreek Key and Santiago Vescovi missed the game, and at that point, both of those guys were starting And then even Santiago, he's dealt with a left shoulder strain. He's had to miss 3 games because of that. So you've had a lot of weird circumstances. Zakai Ziegler kind of moving in and out of the lineup. Julian Phillips, a former 5-star, but he's a freshman trying to get adjusted to college basketball. I mentioned Tyreek Key. He was a terrific scorer at Indiana State, transferred to Tennessee this past offseason. So he's trying to fit into a new role. You have post players, young post players who are trying to step into bigger roles. So you've had a lot of moving pieces this season, and that's why the offense has been hit or miss for the most part. But I expect for the offense to be clicking on all cylinders, be a top 20, top 25 efficient offense by the time the tournament rolls around. But to get back to your question, what's made Tennessee so great, and honestly why they should receive first place votes in the AP poll on Monday, Purdue will still be number 1, especially after the way they beat down Michigan State on Sunday. But why Tennessee should receive some first place votes is because of the defense. Statistically speaking, this is one of the best defenses we've ever seen in college basketball. They do it at every level. They defend the rim well. Opponents do not shoot well from 3. They don't shoot well in general. Tennessee turns teams over. They just make it really hard, and they've been able to be good defensively because they have an older group. So it's been without a doubt the defense that has led the way. And another aspect is, and kind of what makes them so great defensively, is they're so much more physical than everybody. Texas was shook kind of from the start last night, just how big and how physical Tennessee is, and that's allowed them to be successful as well.
Okay. I mean, I think you answered like probably 50% of my next question already on hand here. And you're exactly right. I will tap on that offense. Right now, it is in the top 3. When you look at the advanced stats in the SEC, I believe the Vols are currently 2nd, best net rating out there. And a big reason, you're exactly right, that defense, insanely well rated. As far as that goes, I think 88 points per 100 possession might be one of the best that we've ever seen. I think you're exactly right. Can you explain exactly what it is, though, that has made this work for Rick Barnes, getting the defense to this high of level?
I've asked him this past week. I asked him on Friday. I asked him, why is this defense so great and so dominant? Because they've always been good defensively under Rick Barnes. That's what he cares about most. He cares about defense and he cares about rebounding. Those are his 2 areas that are non-negotiables with his players. He doesn't care if you scored 10 straight points. If you give up a backdoor cut on back-to-back defensive possessions, you're coming out of the game. Or if there's a rebound right there in front of you and you don't grab it, you're coming out of the game. The rebounding and the defense are the 2 non-negotiables. So they've always been good defensively. Last year, they were good defensively, and they returned the majority of that core from last season with all those players I just mentioned a moment ago in the previous answer, which the main ones are Josiah Jordan-James, Santiago Vescovi, Zakai Ziegler, Olivier Kamwa. Like, those are the main guys that are back from a year ago, and the defense that was really good last year is now all of a sudden dominant. And he hasn't really spoken as to why X's and O's wise. He's always stuck with the answer that they're just older and that they know each other like the back of their hand. They know how to play together. They're just a year older, a year maturer. They know what to expect from one another. They know how each other plays. So he credits the simple fact that they've just played a ton of basketball together as to why they've taken this huge step forward. And I think that is the main reason, but I also think that they've gotten better at defending the perimeter and defending on the ball. It wasn't like a huge issue last season, but if the defense did struggle last season, it was because the guards were getting blown by defensively. Zakai Ziegler and Santiago Vescovi, they are improved in that regard in terms of just defending their defender one-on-one and keeping their man in front of them, Josiah Jordan-James as well. And you added Tyreek Key, who is a good defensive player. So I think it's a lot of reasons, but I really think it's the fact that they just played a ton of basketball. And you hear analysts speak all the time about how the biggest thing you really need in March is veteran basketball players and guys who have played a ton of basketball. And that's what this Tennessee team has. And then, like I said in the previous answer as well, they're just so physical. They're so strong, and I don't think people outside of Knoxville realize just how great of a strength and conditioning coach Tennessee has in Garrett Medenwall. I mean, he is just absolutely phenomenal at his job. You look at the photos of the guys when they get to Tennessee compared to kind of where they are now or later in their career, and there's been so many transformations with each guy's body and just how strong that they've gotten. That they are, I would say that you're not going to find a more physical basketball team this season than Tennessee, a stronger basketball team than Tennessee this season. And because of that physical nature that teams don't really know how to play with in today's game that Tennessee has mastered this year, I think that gives teams a lot of problems as well.
You are hyping me up like you wouldn't believe right now with like how much you were talking about these. I'm ready to go suit up for Rick Barnes right now and go play some defense because that was the only thing I was good at when I was playing basketball. So, I mean, I have really enjoyed watching Zakai Ziegler. I'm going to change up Maddie's question here a little bit because, again, I think he answered about half of it. These are great responses. For Zakai Ziegler, she's compared him a little bit to Allen Iverson. I think, honestly, he looks like a sixth man of the year. What do you think has given him the opportunity throughout the season to earn more minutes for this Tennessee team as time has gone on throughout the year?
Yeah, he's always played a lot of minutes. The starting lineup can be a little confusing in that regard. And that's been another thing with Rick Barnes that he has always talked about, that he does not care who starts the basketball game. He really does not. You have to have 5 people on the floor. So that's kind of the way that he looks at it. He cares more about the 5 people who are on the floor at the end of the game. That's what he cares about, because obviously that's crunch time, that's winning time. That's when it matters most. And although Zakai hasn't ever really been a starting point guard or a starter at this level just yet, because he is still kind of young in his career, we in Knoxville feel like Zakai has already been here for 4 years, but he's just halfway through his sophomore season. He's always been on the floor at the end of games. Even last year as a true freshman, he averaged as many minutes as anybody. I don't know the updated stat, but a couple of games ago, just kind of getting into conference play, although he had only started 2 games this year or 1 game this year at the time, he still had the second most minutes played. So he's always played a ton of minutes. He's just always come off the bench. And last year, and even at the beginning of this season, it was a conversation of his preference is to come off the bench, and that he liked to kind of sit on the bench and see the game for a couple of minutes and see if he can pick up on different things that he can take advantage of when he gets into the game. I do feel like maybe we, the media, made that out to be a bigger topic of conversation than it actually is, just because I just don't really know that matters in the grand scheme of things. Just the difference in a couple of minutes of when Zakai comes off the bench and whatnot. But he's always kind of been a 6th starter rather than a 6th man, if that makes sense. And I mentioned earlier that they had a couple of illnesses going around the locker room, and that kind of forced him into the lineup the second or third game of SEC play, and Tennessee's best lineup is with him on the floor. Tennessee's best 5 is with him running point guard. And honestly, if there's a one negative aspect of this Tennessee team, it's that they have one true point guard. That's one of the areas that can be tricky at times if Zakai is hurt or has to miss time or isn't playing well. He's really their only guy. They obviously have a ton of guys that can handle the ball, but in terms of true point guards, he's the only one that they have. So they need him on the floor as much as possible. So I think the fact that they had some injuries and some illnesses that forced the situation of putting him in the lineup, and he's played exceptionally well. He's gotten better this last month since he did get inserted into the lineup, and I certainly think it's there to stay now.
That definitely makes sense. And like I said, I've enjoyed watching him all season. He's fantastic. Let's turn the conversation to Auburn a little bit. Where do you think the catalyst against the Tigers is going to be for the Volunteers?
Yeah, I haven't gotten to watch as much Auburn as I'd like, just because Tennessee tends to play at the same time. That's one of the unfortunate aspects of covering one team, is that your day is dictated around them, and you get to watch whoever's on when they're not playing. So not that I'm completely blind to Auburn, but like I sat down and watched the whole West Virginia and Texas game on Saturday because they played at noon Eastern and Tennessee was at 6 Eastern. So I did get to enjoy that basketball game. And I'm very familiar with Bruce Pearl, obviously, from his time at Tennessee. That's the the peak of mine growing up right there is Bruce Pearl and those Chris Lofton teams. So I know that his teams are going to fight just like they did on Saturday. They got down big, did not look good whatsoever, and were able to fight back because of the KD Johnson energy that he brings. He's a madman and a maniac. So I know he's going to be ready to fight and kind of sparks that whole team. But I'm kind of looking at Janai Broome. He's the big man inside that also brings quite a bit of energy. And I mentioned Tennessee's lack of true point guard depth. The other potential issue, and it's kind of weird to talk about this today because Olivier Kamwa just had a career high 27 points and was absolutely awesome against Texas. But he is by far their best post player, but he's been inconsistent to this point in his career. He's a tremendous basketball player, has a tremendous skill set, still has a ton of potential, but he struggled to be consistent from game to game. And the Texas game kind of came out of nowhere because he had been struggling of late. And he's obviously not the only post player. They have Uroš Plavšić, the big, strong, physical Serbian who he's a role guy. He's not somebody that you're going to be able to win necessarily because of. He's going to help you win and chip in here and there. And then Jonas Adu, he's a sophomore, but he's a youngster, a great rim protector, really, really long and athletic, can block shots, but he's still kind of developing and figuring out college basketball. And they have a freshman, Tobe Awaka from New York, actually played AAU basketball with Zakai Ziegler in New York City, and he is the forward post player version of Zakai Ziegler. The intensity and the effort that Zakai plays with, the physical nature, that's what Tobe Awaka plays with, but he's a freshman, and he's already a great rebounder. And Rick will throw him into basketball games just to go rebound because he can already rebound with anybody in the country, but still trying to figure out things offensively, make sure he's where he needs to be defensively. So he doesn't play a ton, but the post play for Tennessee has been inconsistent this season. And Janai Broome is obviously a guy that is more than capable of taking advantage of post play that does not show up ready to play. So I look at that as kind of the area that Tennessee or Auburn could potentially exploit, but it's also not to feel confident if you're Tennessee that Olivier Kamwa is going to be ready to play after the way that he played against Texas. And then Auburn loves to shoot the basketball. We know that. I think that'll be a fascinating matchup. I mentioned it earlier. They're the best team defensively on the perimeter. Their 3-point field goal percentage defense, Tennessee's, is absolutely remarkable. I don't know what it is after the Texas game, but it was like 28% going into the Texas game and by far the best in the country. So I'm looking at Broome inside in the post. I think he's very talented. I love the energy that he brings on the inside and potentially be an issue if the inconsistencies of Tennessee's post play creeps up. But then obviously Tennessee's going to have to be well aware of Alan Flanagan and Wendell Green and KD Johnson. Those guys can play. It doesn't feel as good of an Auburn team as maybe the last couple of ones that Bruce has had, but they still have plenty of talent, and they're a top 15, top 20 team for a reason.
Oh yeah, no, totally agree. Totally understand. It's been a rough week for Auburn, but they're not getting any favors from going into TBA. That is for sure. You talked a little bit about that perimeter defense that Auburn has. I want to talk a little bit about how Rick Barnes is going to get guys like Santiago Vescovi open and in good situations to take the most high quality shots they can, because we are going to see the best two perimeter defenses in the SEC this weekend.
Yeah, it'll be really fun. It'll be really, really fun. The atmosphere will be fun because Bruce is coming back to Tennessee, and Bruce has kind of had his number with Tennessee while he's been at Auburn as well. There's really only two coaches that have had success in the SEC versus Rick Barnes, and that's Bruce Pearl and Nate Oates. Will Wade also had a good amount of success against Rick, but those have kind of been the three coaches that have had Rick's number to a certain extent these last couple of years. So Tennessee fans will certainly want to win this one on Saturday, because you never want to see your ex-girlfriend doing better than you, right? So it'll be a fascinating matchup. But with Santiago Vescovi, I think it's harder on Auburn to defend and prepare than it is necessarily for Rick to try and create open looks for him, because Tennessee has so many weapons on offense. The numbers may not necessarily back that up right now, but as I spoke to earlier, by the time March Madness rolls around, the NCAA tournament rolls around, this Tennessee offense, I believe, is really going to be clicking on all cylinders, assuming they don't have any more speed bumps with injuries and things of that nature like they have up until this point. But Josiah Jordan-James can shoot the lights out of the ball. Zakai Ziegler was 3 of 4 last night against Texas. He's a terrific perimeter shooter as well. Tyreek Key needs to shoot more. He may be the best. Well, I'm not going to say the best because Santiago is such a great 3-point shooter, but he has as good of a shot as Santiago. And Rick's been trying to get him to shoot the basketball more because of how good of a shooter that he is. So Auburn's really going to have to be focused on all of these players on the perimeter. And even Julian Phillips, the freshman on the wing, he can knock down threes, and his 3-point numbers have looked good over the last month. Olivier Cumwalk can step out and knock down threes. Jonas Adu can as well. So I think Tennessee's best game plan is just its personnel, that Auburn is going to have all of these players to worry about. But Rick likes to work inside out. He wants to get the ball inside to a post player, try and get the defense to collapse, get some motion running side to side, and allow that to open up shots on the perimeter. And Santiago opens up shots for himself. Quite frankly, he's very Steph Curry-like in that sense. Manu Ginobili, not in terms of a shooter, but in terms of he never stops running. He's always running around the floor, cutting and moving. He does not stop moving. That's what makes Steph so great and what allows Steph to get off so many shots. And Santi does the same thing, the college basketball version of that, obviously. He never stops moving, never stops getting around screens, trying to set up his defender to get lost within the defense, and that opens up a ton of shots. While Tennessee's trying to work that ball inside, he's constantly moving around screens, and defenses kind of lose track of him. He plays as hard as anybody in the country just by how much he moves around, and that's been a big talking point from Rick this season. If they had a GPS system on him, I'm sure he's logged so many miles, Forrest Gump style. So Santi kind of does it on his own by how he plays in general, but then also the way Rick wants to get the ball inside, try and get the defense to collapse, and then that opens shots on the perimeter. That's how they'll try to continue to get shots for Santi. And honestly, he's too selfish sometimes, and Rick wants him to force shots if need be, because defenses are so locked onto him that it opens up shots for obviously everybody else. But he still wants opponents to really be focused on Santi. And he's told him, like, hey, if you have to force a shot just to make them expect you to shoot the basketball, do it, because you're a good enough shooter to even make those shots.
That is a great quote right there. I'm going to remind myself of that in the podcast anytime we talk about Muscovy going forward. That's a great volume is a great strategy, and I agree with that. And then a little bit of ball movement to open everybody up. I think your point is well taken there, to get those shots open for the Volunteers. This has been an awesome conversation. So I'm going to let everybody know where they can find you at. Maybe we got some listeners from Arkansas or, Kentucky that aren't too aware of you and where to find you at. And they want to keep up with, a little bit when you guys rematch with Kentucky or Alabama or whatever going forward, where they can find you out, Twitter, and, where you write at.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and appreciate you having me on. Hope all is well in your world, and happy to come on anytime you want. It's going to be a fun month of Tennessee basketball.
Oh, for sure.
Kind of all the bad teams were on the front end of the SEC schedule, or this year's down teams in the league were on the front end of the schedule. Tennessee's got Auburn this Saturday, like we've obviously talked about. But before that, they go to Florida on Wednesday. That'll be a fun matchup. And then Missouri, who's been really impressive out of nowhere, they come to town the following Saturday, and then Kentucky and Alabama are that next week. So it'll be a fun next couple of weeks. And if anybody would like to follow my work, they can follow me on Twitter at Ben McKee 14 and online at govols247.com. I appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having you on. I hope we can have you on again real soon. Rocky top.
Yeah, thanks, David.
All right. And I want to thank Ben again for coming on the show this week. He's really gracious of him to come on. He's a big personality for Tennessee. Definitely go check his stuff out if you're not a follower of his on Twitter or following him on where he writes at. So let's talk about, I was going to say that Auburn-Tennessee game, probably the most exciting game on Saturday. That's probably going to be the best matchup. But another really good one is Florida and Kentucky. Maddie, I'm going to start this before we actually dive into the numbers and everything. Historically, through the early 2000s, this was probably the most important game in the SEC.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel like growing up being an Arkansas fan, Florida and Kentucky were two teams that we had to watch out for. And then, to go even further, I feel like every time I see a Florida Kentucky game, that's not necessarily a rivalry matchup, but it was always one of the key games that each team needed to win.
Absolutely. I mean, it's super interesting, right? The fact that where the Gators are today is nowhere where you saw them in the Billy Donovan era. And right now, this Florida and Kentucky game, even though it's not between the two, heavyweights of the SEC like it was throughout the 2000s, this is still a very important game for both teams because you're going into Rupp Arena on Saturday between these two, and both teams are in a situation where they're trying to figure out how to make sure how to get into the NCAA tournament. Kentucky, on the one hand, currently in, but trying to make sure they're solidified in there. Florida trying to get into that next level of the conversation, which is a next four or a first four situation, trying to keep raising that profile to get in there. And like I mentioned, Todd Golden said to, Castleton, do you want your last memory as a Florida Gator to be a home game or a regular season game or in the SEC tournament? Or do you want to go play in the NIT or NCAA tournament? I think that's really good. I think that's a really interesting message. So this game, to me, it's going to speak a lot of volume to where both these teams are and if they can get quality wins to get their way into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I agree with that. As, regular listeners probably will know, I'm not huge on Florida. I don't know what it is, just not a fan. So I honestly think if we see the Kentucky team that played against Tennessee, we saw glimpses of it last night in the game against Kansas. I think Kentucky will get an easy win here, but I think Florida is going to come ready to fight.
I think it's going to be a situation where they come ready to play. Absolutely. The matchup that I'm the most interested in is going to be between Castleton and Shibwe. Who's going to be the big man? Now, I lean in favor of Big Oscar, like for sure. That's especially in Rupp. He's had some historic nights. You're talking about the National Player of the Year. It's the matchup I'm the most interested in when it comes to this game. I think Castleton can play with him. It's just going to be a question of who's going to be bumping and grinding to get a win. We saw Sanogo when UConn came to play Florida just kind of beat up on Castleton a little bit, and you saw the quality level difference there. Now, Castleton played the best he could, and I think this is going to be another situation that we saw where you're just going to have a big who's a little bit more talented than Castleton is, and that's going to be the matchup to kind of pay attention to. Is he going to be able to close that gap and use the things he learned against Sanogo when Florida played UConn, or is Oscar Shibwe going to dominate this night?
I mean, I feel like it's going to be Oscar Sheep Day on Saturday
Oscar Sheep Day.
Rupp Arena against Colin Castleton. So I'm taking Kentucky for that one.
It makes sense. We should mention that Kentucky, before their loss to Kansas, won 4 in a row. They were playing much better basketball. They have looked like, I'm not going to say they look like the team that was advertised, but they're playing better basketball. And there's a little bit of, I'm not going to say excitement, but we're getting back to who we are in the mindset right now, Big Blue Nation. So that is something to consider. Very quietly, not a lot of people realize this. Both Florida and Kentucky are only 3 games back in the SEC regular season race. If Alabama loses those games, I was talking about, winner could find themselves in the hunt. I think Kentucky, out of the two of them, has the best chance to find themselves back in the hunt. But it's interesting. It's really interesting. And I think a lot of people, in Big Blue Nation would like to see Kentucky get a little bit more momentum before they have to play some bigger games down the stretch. Like Arkansas is coming to Kentucky here pretty soon. You're going to have to face Tennessee again. There's a lot of interesting games that are coming up for the Cats.
Yeah, and I think this might be a different conversation if the game were in Gainesville.
Yeah,
but the fact that it is in Rupp Arena, Big Blue Nation, like you said, I wouldn't say excited, maybe more relieved. So I think we're going to see a little bit better crowd in Kentucky this Saturday.
The other side of this is that, like, I didn't even think about this when we first started the conversation, is what Florida team is going to show up. And what I mean by that is that we saw what happened in the Kansas State game. We saw
Yep.
what happened in the Texas A&M game. They played terrible first halves. Just horrible. They didn't start slow. They started chained to the bottom of the ocean to a sinking ship. They just had horrible first. So if Kentucky can jump on them early in this game, I definitely think Kentucky can. That's where the runaway situation I think you're talking about comes from. If Kentucky can beat them on offense and defense for the first 10 minutes, Florida's done. They're going to have to play a consistent game in Rupp Arena to have a chance. Just thinking about that now a little bit more in hindsight.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know. I think, like you said, Colin Castleton, the biggest name for Florida basketball right now. It really just depends. And I think Oscar Tshiebwe, like I said, is going to dominate him.
Yeah. And also, I always believe in the term returning to a mean, right? Kentucky shot really poorly against Kansas from deep. You've got guys who can shoot from deep. See, Frederick's not going to play the same way he did. You're going to have Antonio Reeves. You're going to have, Livingston. Those guys are going to make big contributions for Kentucky. I think there's too many pieces in the Wildcats for Florida to handle, and not enough pieces for Kentucky to have a massive concern on how they're going to take care of something on defense. And then they got Shavir Wheeler on the bench right now, coming on and off, who can take over to supplement the point guard position for Kentucky. I think Kentucky's depth also plays a factor in this. I'm liking the Cats a little bit more. The new look Cats, as Cal's kind of put them out there and readjusted their lineup a little bit. It's weird to look at the leaders for Kentucky right now and see Wheeler as one of the leaders when he's not getting as much minutes right now. So it's kind of like you got to put a note in your brain when you're looking at the Kentucky leaderboard and go, he's not going to be as the big that he's going to be. It's not a criticism on him. He's done his job. He's just, I think it's a chemistry balance issue for him when it comes to Kentucky, but it's neither here nor there. I like Kentucky in this game. Too many pieces, too much depth. And if Florida just gets beat up in the first 10 minutes, no ball game.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about a little bit of women's hoops real fast. All right, Maddie, let's start with the party that's going down in the Maravich Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. LSU Tigers currently on a 20-game winning streak. Whew, that's crazy to talk about.
It is. I think this is going to be a really interesting matchup, probably one of the best of the week for conference play, because we'll talk about an even better matchup here in a little bit. But, Tennessee, when we first started talking about this women's basketball schedule, we thought Tennessee was going to be the only team that could knock off South Carolina, and their gameplay through conference hasn't really shown us that. They've, started to climb back up, won some key games that they needed to, but now this LSU Tiger team sits at the top of the conference with South Carolina, has played some amazing basketball, and I feel like this is going to be an interesting matchup because this is going to be a game Tennessee needs to win to be in postseason talks.
Yeah, I agree. It's weird, right? Like Tennessee didn't do as well as we thought they were going to do in the non-conference, but here they are in SEC play, and they're 8-0. They're 8-0. Mm-hmm. They're tied. They're in third place in the SEC standings, and they're sitting there a half a game behind South Carolina. You're tied essentially for first, with LSU and South Carolina. But when I look at Tennessee, they look like the third best team in the SEC right now. It's just who they are, but they've been playing better every week. The question is do they have enough to come down and beat Angel Reese and LSU on the road? I think a big thing for Tennessee is how effective are they going to be outside when they're shooting? Like that's going to be the thing to look at. And I think Tess Darby is probably your best bet for Tennessee behind the arc. And, she leads the squad in threes. She's a good player, 41% shooting from downtown. She's good. And I think it's the best approach that Tennessee can have is getting the floor spread out and keeping this game away from Angel Reese from LSU.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if we're, looking at that, I think we see Rakia Jackson and Jordan Horston are going to be their best bet to get a win here.
Yeah, and LSU is an outstanding rebounding team, so you're going to have to be very good with your shot selection. That's one of the things that you're going to have to pay attention to. I mentioned Angel Reese. When it comes to rebounds, she's yanking down 15.5 boards a game. It's crazy.
Yep.
Really good numbers from her. She's a great player. I can't wait to talk about whoever wins this game when they face South Carolina. That's going to be interesting. That's going to be a really good conversation. Right now, I'm thinking LSU wins this game. Home court advantage, got the momentum. We didn't say that LSU was going to be a bad team or where they would be falling in the middle pack. We did say that we thought Tennessee was the team that looked like it beat South Carolina, but we did say look out for LSU, and here they are 20-0. Right now, I'm putting my money on the hot hand. I really like LSU in this game. They look like they are definitely one of the best teams in the SEC. It's come down to a 2-team race, I think, unless Tennessee can win this game in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it'll be a fun game to watch. Monday night, kicking your week off with some basketball, that'd be a game to be interested in my point of view.
It's super meaningful game for the race and for SEC title. Just can never count Tennessee out when it comes to SEC games. It's just not allowed. You can't count them out of anything. So I think it's really interesting. Speaking on the subject of Tennessee, we need to stay on them because they have another huge game this week. Depending on how the Ole Miss Arkansas game goes, there's definitely some interest around the Ole Miss Tennessee game. What are your kind of thoughts initially for Ole Miss and Ole Miss paying a visit to Knoxville?
I think home court advantage is going to be huge for Tennessee in this game. So Ole Miss is really going to have to overcome that. Anytime you have a home game at Tennessee, I feel like it is one of the biggest conferences backed by fans, or biggest teams backed by fans in any conference. You got UConn and Tennessee kind of right up there as to, women's basketball fans. And that's not a knock on any of the other teams. It's just, Pat Summitt, one of the biggest influences in women's basketball. So you have the team where she coached, the court that's named after her. That's something that a lot of teams going on the road to Tennessee are going to have to overcome. And, Ole Miss is no exception. They are, doing well in conference play. Their win-loss record 6-2 right now. I think it really depends how taxed this Tennessee team is going to be against this LSU team on Monday to see what kind of game they're going to play on Thursday. Because,
Right.
It's pretty quick turnaround for them.
Oh, yeah, no, it's definitely a quick turnaround. For this Thursday game, what I do find interesting is that Ole Miss right now, depending on what happens in Arkansas today, Ole Miss is 5-2 on the road. They have played well on the road this season. Mm-hmm. They are 6-2. They are the first the first team with a loss, out of that column in the SEC standing. So technically, I guess they're fourth, depending on how you look at it. Third, however you sort that out in your mind. They're a good basketball team. I think that Ole Miss women's basketball right now is getting bigger than Ole Miss men's basketball, just in the minds of people who are Rebels fans. I think that's really interesting. I do like Ole Miss to put up a really good fight here. They've been a good team, but they've also taken some losses that are kind of puzzling, right? They had the loss to Alabama. They've had the loss to Auburn. Those are their 2 losses, and they've come in the last 5 games. They beat Mississippi State. We'll see what happens today with them playing Arkansas. Keep that in the back of your mind. See if they've got a little bit of rhythm again to get themselves going. But right now, Ole Miss looks like a very, very tough team to play basketball against. It wouldn't surprise me if they play tough enough to pull out an upset. I believe it would be an upset in Knoxville.
Oh, yeah. I think so as well. Either way, whoever wins this game, it's going to be a good one to watch.
It definitely will. Definitely one that definitely piqued our interest. You were good on calling these this week. I want you to know that. Like, this is some really good takes as far as like we should watch this game. This game seems pretty good.
Well, just looking through the schedule, unfortunately, it wasn't hard to choose from this week. You have a lot of lower tier matchups when it comes to women's basketball in the SEC. So
yeah, it's just kind of easy to figure out where to go.
Yeah,
for the most part.
These are actually 2 teams that are in the conversation. Okay, we'll watch that game.
Yep, no, definitely. Yeah, it's been kind of up and down. It's kind of how we joke all the time about it's choose your own adventure, for like the men's standing in the middle tier. It has been choose your own adventure like crazy for the for the women. Like, you just don't know what's going to happen when you talk about that upper middle tier. You're like, I think Arkansas is going to win, but I have no idea. They're 4-4 right now. And then it's like, yeah, there's a reason they're 4-4. It's because everybody else, there's so much parity. There's so much parity outside of the LSU and South Carolina situation. It's so nuts. So like, I don't know exactly how to think about women's hoops right now, about like making power rankings or anything like that. It's so weird to figure out the situation, but you have to be impressed with the teams that are starting to break away from that, and starting to put themselves in a separate category that in between category between LSU, South Carolina, middle tier, and then whoever else is going to be left over when the dust clears in this battle, to see who's going to, where they're going to end up in the standings of the conference. Let's talk about the last game you pointed out. Two of the blue bloods, I would say, and women's basketball playing each other. Of course, Tennessee played UConn last week. That was definitely a women's basketball blue blood matchup. This week we have South Carolina facing UConn. Maddie, what are your initial thoughts between these two?
We need to make, like, how we had the screen for David Martz and Christian Sykes?
Yeah.
So I think we need to do that, but it's the Aaliyah versus Aaliyah matchup.
The Aaliyah versus Aaliyah matchup?
Yeah, we've got Aaliyah Boston for South Carolina and Aaliyah Edwards, absolutely outstanding for UConn. I think that is going to be a super interesting battle to watch.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be interesting. When I look at South Carolina, and every game I've watched them beat the pants off of everybody, and they've beaten good teams and beaten the heck out of them, and they're putting up 90 points in the process. Their last 4 games, their low in the last 4 games has been 81 points. That's insane. They beat Arkansas 92-46 in Columbia. In Nashville, they beat Vanderbilt 96-48. Mizzou 81-50, and then Kentucky 95-66. Just nuts how good they are when it comes to, they are a very deep and very good team. Aaliyah Boston is an amazing basketball player. Personally, I like the Gamecocks here, but this game is in Hartford, and it's between two of the top teams. Maybe Kentucky, UConn looks interesting. They definitely look interesting. They're a 20-2 team with an 11-0 home record. I'm not counting out the Huskies for anything. My money would be on South Carolina. I trust South Carolina to win this game, but I think we're going to watch one of the best basketball games in women's hoops that we're going to get this season up there in Hartford, Connecticut.
I think so too. I think, this is finally going to be a team that South Carolina is going to have to put in some effort to make, to get a win here. And, not knocking any of the teams that they've played so far, but I think this is, just going to be a battle of talent, because we have one of the most talented teams in UConn. I think they're currently ranked 5th against our number 1 South Carolina team. So unfortunately, not a conference matchup, but I think it will be one of the best basketball games, men's and women's, all week.
There's always a tier to women's basketball, it feels like you have the elite teams and then you have the good teams. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't think it's a knock when you talk about LSU, South Carolina, and UConn, because that's an elite class of basketball teams. And then you have good teams like Arkansas, Mizzou, Alabama. Those are good teams, but they're just not. This is a different class of women's basketball. These are guys. These are women who are going to be coming up, and they're probably some of them are going to have a shot to play for Team USA, playing the WNBA. Like, they're going to be really, really good teams. Not saying that those other teams don't have WNBA talent somewhere on their roster, but like, when you look at these teams, there's a couple of them. Like, this is a very deep. These are deeper rosters. These are very interesting teams to take a look at if you want to get to know the women's game. You're going to watch a very good basketball game on February 5th. Definitely one worth checking out.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Maddie. So earlier this week, I pointed out that the numbers for the podcast and our listens and everything, a lot of things changed, right? Like, we no longer were just relying completely on social media. And I looked at things, and I realized that we had a lot of people who are subscribed on Spotify, YouTube, and all over the place. Now, I don't have a complete list. I just told everybody, hey, if you like this message and kind of let us know that you've subscribed, we want to say thank you. So I've told him I give him a shout out. So here is the list of people who liked the tweet. I know there's more of you out there. You may have not seen the post about it, but I also want to give you a thank you at the end of this as well. But these are the names of the folks who liked us. We've got Alex Rudnick. Thank you very much for subscribing. Caleb Shepard out there. He gave us a subscription as well. Jace Bradley, Madison Riggins, Tobin Alderman. You know what? I've interacted with Tobin a couple of times. Big Texas A&M fan. I think you might be one of the few Texas A&M fans who listens to the show. Skeeter, Harrison Poole, Nate Oates burner account, and also our friends from the Uptempo podcast have also liked the tweet. I don't know if they were saying thank you, if they were subscribed. So, awesome stuff. Thank you guys so much. Please, guys, subscribe to the podcast if you like the show. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. We put videos out, YouTube. We love having y'all. We love having people interact with us online. We especially like really good takes on stuff. You don't have to agree with us, but give us a really interesting opinion and we'll talk to you about it. It's fun. We love talking basketball. We love all this stuff. So to me, thank you guys so much for subscribing and building us up this year. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And if you like basketball, if you have friends that like basketball, make sure to mention our podcast. You guys can talk about it. You can talk to us about it. If you have a wild or outlandish take, we might talk about it on the show. You never know. So
absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, thank you guys for subscribing so much wherever you subscribe at. And thank you for letting us know that you subscribe. So that's meaningful for us. So we really appreciate it. Let's see. I guess we need to start wrapping up this show, Maddie. I know that it's going to be another long one. We've been doing a lot of 90-minute shows here lately. We'll see where this one ends up after the editing room, but we'll see how it goes. But as we get out of here today, I have a singular thought.
What's that?
There's a lot of good teams in the Big 12, but my brother's team lost this week. My brother's team lost this week, and I just want to let them know that Texas was made into a steak dinner in Knoxville, Tennessee this week, and I greatly appreciate the Tennessee Volunteers for turning the Texas Longhorns. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. The University of California at Austin, Texas, into a steak dinner. I really appreciate that. Thank you for whooping their butt. I appreciate it. You have no idea how good that makes me smile, especially on the inside. As always, horns down. And someday I'm going to have to be nice to them when they start listening to this podcast.
I was going to say, I really can't wait until, hopefully we're still doing the podcast when they join
at the beginning of that season.
And you have to actually talk about them.
I know. That's going to be funny, right? I'm going to read a disclaimer at the beginning. It's everything that David says about the Longhorns, take with a grain of salt. Maddie is the expert in all things Texas.
I don't want to put that on myself. You know me. The only thing I've said that is good that comes out of the University of Texas is Matthew McConaughey. So
at least you've said something nice.
I did. But who wouldn't say that about Matthew McConaughey? He seems like a great guy.
Just keep living. I'm just saying.
All right.
I figured it was a while since I badmouthed Texas, and they gave me a good reason this week to do it. So anyway, thank you, Tennessee fans. We really appreciate that. Thank you, Zakai Ziegler, for beating the tar out of them and driving on the floor, grabbing that loose ball, everything that you guys. We appreciate your service.
Yeah, just in case I'm not around for the Tennessee talk
interview today. Yeah.
Zakai Ziegler, comparable to AI. I love it. He's the man that got me into professional basketball. So that's what Chanley always said. She was like, I didn't know who Allen Iverson was until you started talking about him. I was like, exactly. He was the man.
Football. My brother used to have a Denver Nuggets Allen Iverson jersey. It was awesome. So
cool.
Yeah.
I want to get one of the Georgetown ones.
The Georgetown.
Seen those floating around.
It's a good one to get. It's the right school for him too. He picked the perfect school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gritty, tough player. Go play for a gritty school with a reputation of being gritty and tough. I'm digging it. I don't know. Was John Thompson retired when Allen Iverson went to Georgetown, wasn't he?
I don't remember.
I'd have to go look. I don't remember who Allen Iverson's college coach was, but go check that stuff out. Oh well.
Obviously, he did a good job.
No, made the NBA, right? He's gone
Yep.
down probably one of the legends of that era of basketball before, the Kobe takeover and everything. Like, weird era of the NBA, right? Like, it's the forgotten era, kind of so to speak, but no one forgets Allen Iverson, and we're talking about practice.
Talking about
Practice. We're talking about practice. Best clip from Ted Lasso is showing the duality of using those words. Like, you have Allen Iverson who's making fun of, we're talking about practice. And then you got Ted Lasso, using it as like, oh no, but we're not talking about a game, like changing it completely.
We're talking about practice.
We're talking about practice. Yeah.
Can't wait for that new season to come out.
I know, I can't either.
Is it March?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is sometime in March.
And picture the shape that you made. Oh damn it, I'm tired. This running takes a toll on your mind. Oh damn it, I tried. Too late, now here comes the fight. Stay here and hold me. I'm in agony, you're a poison. You drip through my veins, slowly strangle my brain as you hold me. Stay here and hold me. Sick of the screams in my pillow. I'm hoarse from your name, I keep screaming in vain as you want me. I try the runaround, hopeless with your laces tied. Find another route, how long till I get it right? Oh damn it, I'm tired. This running takes a toll on your mind. Oh damn it, I tried. Too late, now here comes the fight. Hold me. Hold me. Stay here and hold me. I'm in agony, you're a poison. You drip through my veins, slowly strangle my brain as you want me. Stay here and hold me. Sick of the screams in my pillow. I'm hoarse from your name, I keep screaming in vain as you want me. Stay here and hold Stay here and hold me.